What's poppin', family? Today we're going to be doing a spiritual decode on the movie Tenet. If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend to check it out because it's got some super deep meaning behind it. And I'll probably end up having to do a part two, honestly, because even with all the information I got to today, I got my notes with me, so I don't miss nothing. But I'm barely even scratching the surface as far as all the messages and nuances that's within the movie. So definitely check it out. I'm gonna definitely hit on some of the major points just so you can see what we got going, right? So tenet comes from the Latin word tenere, which means to hold. Tenet is defined as a principle or belief. It is also a palindrome, which means that it is spelled the same way forwards as it is backwards, similar to like race car. So the whole premise of Tenet is based around a pincer movement, which I'll pull up the picture here on the screen. And so a pincer movement is when a force outflanks its opponent and attacks from two sides at the same time. So a temporal pincer movement would be in relation to time. So same strategy, same warfare strategy, but in relation to time, right? So essentially, it would be to hold a belief or principle while defending your current position in space and time. We are in a spiritual war. And so you are currently being influenced by your past and future mentalities. Now, the past and future are not places, they are mentalities, okay? So it's important to understand that because they are mentalities, you can travel there mentally, but we'll get into that a little later. So time fools you into thinking that you are moving by measuring a distance between death and birth, which we call life, aka the loop. The feedback loop is what programs the mind through symbols, repetition, and trauma. The more disconnected from self you are, the more susceptible you become to these symbols, repetition, or trauma. And this is with the intent of programming. Programming is specific behavior or trait, right? So once I know your desire, I control you. If you tell me what you dislike, again, I control you because I can create symbols, trauma, or repetitive events that will trigger or rather program a behavior. And if I can affect your thoughts, right? Because it starts at the thoughts. If I can affect your thoughts, then I can change your words. And if I can change your words, I can change your actions. If I can change your actions, I can change your habits. If I can change your habits, I can change your character. And if I can change your character, I can change your destiny. So, if I can turn, for instance, a hero into a villain, I have succeeded in applying my programming and overriding that character, which would be considered a character assassination. So, a core concept of neurolinguistic programming is that the map highlights the experiences between belief and reality. So, it's important to understand, however, the map is not the territory. This was said by Alfred Korzeniowski, a 20th century philosopher. And he essentially stated that individuals don't have absolute knowledge of a reality. Instead, they have a set of beliefs built up over time about reality. So, a map, which could be seen as a soul, is formed from the data received from the senses. Now, people's belief about reality and their awareness is not reality itself. So, people's belief about reality and their awareness, the map, or their map, is not reality itself, the terrain. So, each person operates within their own perspective rather than a place of objectivity. So, no attempt to capture reality can replace reality itself. And this is important to understand because when you understand this, you understand why it's important to visit the scene of a crime, for instance, and why it's important to not just rely on eyewitness testimonies, but rather to put yourself in that environment so that you can absorb with all of your senses. Knowledge is a double-edged sword because its depth and its breadth can skew your view. And you have to understand, because the past is a mentality, people are operating within that mentality, right? And so people are also operating within a future mentality. These are the people who are thinking ahead of their time, right? And then you have people who are stuck into traumatic cycles, reliving the same trauma that they've been through over and over and over, same shit, different day. That's what you'll hear from those type of people, right? And the reason why they're going through the same thing is because they're living in the past. So, the past has not seen the future, okay? Therefore, if you are a future thinker, you're going to have details that are not yet privy to others. You're going to have information that they haven't had access to yet. And so you must spoon feed them the information until they are there with you. The mind is to be reflected through gnosis, whereas the consciousness discerns. And it's important to understand the difference between the two because especially when we look at wisdom versus consciousness, wisdom is to be made to grow, whereas consciousness is only to be fully comprehended. So feelings, perceptions, and consciousness are conjoined. It is impossible to discern one of them from the other, to describe the difference, since what one feels, one perceives, and what one perceives, one discriminates. So your mind is what is constantly determining, or rather your consciousness is rather discriminating and determining your reality, right? So the whole premise of TENET is that a technology in the future is invented in order, or rather that the technology can invert the entropy of people and objects. And so entropy is defined as the way any closed system will move from order to disorder. So you can look at this kind of the same way we look at someone who is socially programmed, socially conditioned, versus someone who believes in their chaos magic, someone who is practicing chaos magic, right? And so when you reverse the entropy of a person, you essentially create a split personality, right? You got one person based in the past, one person based in the future. Now, the future mentality is going to be seen as chaotic to the people from the past because they're not understanding the details from being in the future. There's a level of insight, there's a level of gnosis that you have from actually being in a place and sensing it rather than just reading it in a book or reading it online or seeing a picture. So, since it's seen as chaotic, right, this is where it becomes a battle. It becomes a fight because you have people who have that past mentality, and these are the people who want to keep things the same. They want things to remain as they are. And then you have the future minded, the people who are so ahead of their times that they want to bring in some of those future ideas, those future qualities that may improve the lives of millions of people and implement that. However, again, change is terrifying to people who are not ready to embrace it. So the mindset is the vehicle, the ship, right? And if it's in the past, it will keep reliving the same events. If it is in the future, it is subject to chaos, essentially, or to the laws of chaos. And the only thing that becomes constant is change at that point. Programming created order, whereas the technology reversed it. So magic is self-belief. Let's get that straight, right? So your belief system dictates and discerns opportunities. If you consider the neuromechanics behind mental time travel, aka visualization, you are literally transporting your psyche to a presumed future. If you add in sensory data, then the experience becomes indistinguishable from reality. The brain can do in your imagination the same thing that your senses do in the real world. Envisioning something is the mental equivalent to being there. In the brain, it elicits similar neurological and emotional responses. So imagine or remember a time where you woke up from a vivid dream and it took you a minute to kind of orient yourself before realizing it was all a dream. During that time, your brain was convinced otherwise until your conscious mind decided differently. This is what I'm talking about when I speak on as far as consciousness being that discernment or that discriminating factor, right? Our consciousness is what discriminates. And so TENET represents the war on the conscious mind, aka belief systems. So the past and the future are not places, but rather a mentality. So the tendency towards randomness is called entropy. Entropy is the measure of chaos or disorder. Chaos magic is believing in yourself and your ability to influence past events through futuristic thinking and self-expression. Despite the time you are living in, time is an illusion. Clocks exist. Time is an agreed upon construct that we have taken distance. What we did was we looked at one rotation of the earth and one orbit of the sun. And then we divided that into segments. We labeled those segments and we created a construct, a shared construct that is useful. Time is useful. However, we've been programmed to live our lives by this construct as if it were real. And we have confused our shared construct with something that is tangible and therefore have become its slave. You must break free and tap into your inner gnosis in order to get out of the feedback loop. You see what I'm saying? And so you got to ask yourself, are you team future or are you team past? Did you come to change and influence events, or did you come to see to it personally that things stay the same? Now, in the movie, Andre Sater is the villain, right? And Sater's plan is to use the algorithm to reverse the arrow of time permanently, which would mean that rather than simply flowing backwards, the people in the future would be able to overwrite the past. Now, in TENET, we have two different teams. We got a red team and we got a blue team. The blue team starts the attack 10 minutes into the future, but are traveling backwards through time. Now, the red team, they are traveling forward through time. Another observation I had as far as the teams, just the colors, of course, red is typically associated with hot, heat, right? Blue, cold. So you got hot and cold. You got passion versus orderly, right? And so you got essentially chaos versus order. And the world in Tenet is at threat from a temporal war, a time war, due to a Russian, somebody who's rushing, sounds like the red team to me, a Russian oligarch, Satyr. And Satyr is actually derived from the Satyr Square, which I'll speak about in a little bit. But Satyr is, the meaning is to sow or to plant. And it literally translates as the seeder, you know, the originator, the progenitor, the creator in a sense, right? And so there is a thought experiment that you can check out called Maxwell's Demon. And this thought experiment basically is evidence that seemingly defies the second law of thermodynamics. And so the second law of thermodynamics essentially relates to the flow of water, right? It essentially states that naturally water is going to flow from the higher level to the lower level. However, an increase in entropy accounts for the irreversibility of natural processes, often referred to as the arrow of time. So when we spoke on the arrow of time earlier, Satyr's plan was to use the algorithm to reverse the arrow of time permanently, which would change the flow. So when we speak on cold versus hot water, because I feel like it's important to highlight on that aspect, and you'll see why here in a second. Cold water has a greater density than hot because its water molecules are more sluggish. Vibrations and movements are slower and less energetic. The molecules bounce and jostle each other less, so more can fit together in a smaller space. When typically you refer to somebody as being dense or being hard-headed, typically that means that they are hard to get through, right? It's hard to get a message through them. The reason why warm water is less dense than cold water is the heat itself. So when heat is introduced to water, the molecules become excited by the energy. They begin to move faster. So when they bump into one another, they bounce further away. The increased space between the fast-moving molecules decreases the density. So when we're looking at, for instance, with the ocean, masses of warm water rise above cold water in the world's ocean. Given currents, warm tropical water is shuttled through toward the poles in a motion like a conveyor belt, with cold waters underneath. The divide in the temperature is called the thermocline. The thermocline. Now, the Gulf Stream is an example of this phenomenon. And this cycle of bringing warm tropical water up also affects climate over large geographical areas. London, for instance, is not as cold as Calgary, despite being at the same level of altitude, because it benefits from the Gulf Stream. Now, sometimes when warm and cold mix, the result is not always peaceful. And this can result in a storm or a hurricane. And if you look at people as hot or cold, I'm sure you know some people who are cold in a sense who really don't have that passion. They really don't have that spark in their eye. They've lost that. And they are much more fearful of the programming, of societal constructs, of belief systems that have been conditioned and programmed into them. Whereas hot people, fiery people, passionate people, these type of individuals are going to create it by any means necessary. They're going to get it done. They're going to do everything with a sense of a spark to them, because within is pure fire, pure energy. And moving this energy around is exciting the molecules. The same way it operates in water is the same way it operates within humans. When you go out and you get sun, the heat, it does wonders for your molecules. It starts to move all the energy throughout your body. And as this energy starts to circulate, you start to tap in to all your true powers. You see what I'm saying? And so when we talk about the Sator square, for instance, right? So there is essentially, let me pull up the image. Boom. So this is a Sator square. So this is a 5x5 grid that essentially is a system with, it's essentially a system that it's like it essentially creates palindromes, right? So if you look up and down across, there's various sequences that the letters can be aligned in to make different words, and it makes up 5 different words. So the first being Satyr, which we spoke on, which means to sow or to plant, the originator, the cedar. Arepo, that meaning is unknown, most likely a name. We have Tenet, which comes from the word tener, to hold, which means to keep, comprehend, possess, master. Opera, which is work, care, labor, service, effort, trouble, opus. And then rotus, which is wheels you turn or cause to rotate. So again, in Tenet, they play off of the villain being named Satyr. So everything is tied into each other in that same sense, right? And the more you try and understand it, the less it'll make sense. You just have to feel it. And this is what one of the scientists tells the protagonist in the early scenes, is that you can't understand it. Just feel it. Try to reach out and grab the bullet, right? And as he does this, he is not understanding because he is applying his past way of thinking. And so this is where the confusion comes in, because it seems chaotic for an object to be in this inverted state. However, water flows, and this is what I was speaking on earlier in terms of the second law of thermodynamics. So water always flows spontaneously on its own from higher level to the lower level. It never goes up automatically. Thus, this spontaneous process indicates the increase of entropy in the universe. So this process is saying that is a direct indication of increased chaos within the universe, right? More disorder. And you got to understand, family, that the shift has already been underway and the water has been heating up. And so I'll leave off with one of my favorite quotes from the movie, and it happens pretty much in the beginning. And it's, "We live in a twilight world and there are no friends at dusk. What this is essentially speaking to is the dual nature existence of the world. One is visible and the other is invisible, right? And so a spy belongs to the invisible world due to the nature of their work. Typically, it's often alone. This same concept can be applied to spirituality. When you go on your spiritual walk, when you embark on your spiritual journey, typically there's going to be a period where you have to cut a lot of the past elements that will keep you from getting to where you would like to be. And in regards to the dusk aspect, dusk signifies the end of daylight. So this would be symbolically referring to dark times. So we live in a twilight world, a dual nature existence world, and there are no friends during dark times, right? If the sun sets, everyone will be concerned with their own survival and not helping others. Hence why there are no friends at dusk. There are no friends during dark times. This is why it's important, family, to truly understand which team you are on. Are you on Team Future or are you on Team Past? Because we are at war right now. We are trying to combat past, outdated, antiquated mentalities and infuse new, innovative ideas that can collectively uplift and assist everyone. However, it's going to be a process because this is a temporal pincer movement. We got two teams working on the same thing at the same time, attacking the invisible enemy, right? Which would be converging all on the point of now. However, which team are you on? Are you trying to keep things the same or are you pushing for change? Are you pushing to influence the world in a positive way by expressing your futuristic thinking and your ways of dealing with situations that have not been realized yet? Which side are you on? Peace.